Hey everybody, welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. I'm your host, Kip Kirchberg. Today we're going to be talking about pillar number 2 of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, Protect. You know, there's things in our environments that we must protect. We must look at protecting our applications, who has access to them, when they have access, and what time frame do they have access to. The second item we need to focus on is our users. Which users have access? How do they access it? Do we have multi-factor set up in our environment? Then we start to think about our data. How do we protect our data? How do we protect our data when it's live and working? How do we protect our data at rest? Are we encrypting it? Are we taking protective measures to back it up, protect it, etc.? And then finally, most of all, is endpoint protection. What are we doing to protect our endpoints? Did you know that over 90% of all cybersecurity events or incidents occur due to user mistakes or a system misconfiguration? That's right, 90%. That's quite a bit. Now, you got to ask yourself, what are you doing to help prevent these events? Well, there's many steps you can take, and there's many layers on helping protect your business assets from cybersecurity events. First, we're going to talk about your applications. You know, a lot of people say, well, what do I do with my applications? How do I protect my applications? Well, first, do you know who has access to your systems and your applications? Are those tied back to a single source of truth or an Active Directory? Example, if somebody leaves your company or you let somebody go, are you having to scramble to change a whole bunch of passwords to system shares or endpoint devices or applications or different systems? If you are, you don't have the right system in place or right practice for application management. Really what you should be doing is limiting users to what systems they have access to or applications they have access to. Example, tying applications back to Active Directory where applicable. Many applications now tie into Active Directory, and you can give Sally in accounting limited access to only her accounting applications. You can give George in shipping access to only the shipping information. You can also lock that down a little further and only give those folks access to the data when they need it. Meaning you can set restrictions to limit that 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, or whenever your business operates. This is just one of the many steps you could take in limiting user access to applications when they don't need it, or vice versa, not giving a user too much access. Example, George in shipping probably doesn't need access to accounting information. So limiting your users' access is key here, and tying that back to Active Directory or a single source. So if that employee leaves or is terminated, you can simply click a button and know that they no longer have access to your environment. The next item we're going to talk about is how do you protect your users? Do you require them to use complicated passwords? That's step number 1. Let's not allow them to use password 123, but let's have them use some special characters, numbers, even a certain length. You know, 8 characters is simply not enough. Right now, a lot of organizations are going to 12, 15 characters. Now, writing a book for a password is difficult itself as well. So what are your next steps you can do? Well, plain and simple, you really should start to look at enabling multi-factor authentication. As businesses move to Azure, AWS, or other cloud environments, it's quite obvious that now they're becoming victims of cyber crimes or cyber attacks because they simply don't have multi-factor authentication turned on. I've seen time and time again when I go into an environment or called in, people want me to analyze, well, how did these attackers get in? How did they get access to our data? How were they able to send email from Sally's account in accounting when they shouldn't have? Well, it's quite simple. More often than not, they simply don't have multi-factor enabled on their accounts. Microsoft has proven that 99% of the botnet attacks that hit an environment can be stopped with multi-factor authentication. What are you doing with your data? Are you limiting what users can access and what data they can access? Or do you have a share out there that says anybody can access it, everyone can change it, add, remove, delete? Well, obviously that's not the thing to do. What you really need to do is limit the access based on who needs to know and the who needs to know basis. If Sally in accounting is the only one that needs access to the accounting records, or your CFO or CEO, then you limit the access just to those folks. George in the shipping department definitely doesn't need to see financial information, but he will need to see a lot of shipping information, working with U.S. Postal Service, UPS, FedEx, etc. At the same token, Sally doesn't need access to his shipping information, just like he doesn't need access to the accounting records. So really just limit a user's access and sprawl throughout the environment. That helps tremendously in a cyber attack. It helps prevent lateral movement into areas that people really don't belong. The other thing you can do is encrypt your data at rest. Yeah, very simple. Encrypting your data is one of the best things you can do. It's protecting your data sitting at rest. Now, I'm no genius, I'm no mathematician. I do know that if it's not encrypted, you can simply hook it up to another machine, plug it in, and see the data. However, if that data is encrypted and I offload that data and attempt to access it from another device, I can tell you it's 10 times harder to get into that and sometimes even impossible. So to protect your data, there are two things. Only give access to those that need to know, and then encrypt your data at rest. There's tools out there that allow you to do it from Microsoft, Azure, AWS, etc. They all have tools. Nowadays, it's just simply the click of a button and data is encrypted. All right, now we're going to talk about what do you need to do to protect your endpoints. That's right. The computer Sally's using up in accounting. How are you protecting it? George is down there in the mailroom. He needs to protect his machine. Well, what are some basic steps you can take? Well, number one, the first step you can take is making sure you're running on the latest and greatest operating system. Number two, you can make sure that machine is up to date and patched of all software on the machine, including Microsoft updates. Finally, what we see a lot of people doing is installing some sort of malware or antivirus program on the machine. I will tell you installing those apps are definitely better than nothing, but what they do not prevent is zero-type day attacks. The stuff you're seeing in the news where somebody's been living in a direct attack, where somebody's been living in that environment, doing reconnaissance on the network, getting onto different machines, and launching a cryptoware attack. It's not going to stop things like that. What we're seeing is people are using the lay of the land or the built-in tools to launch these attacks, things like PowerShell, command prompt, etc. What some of these new white listing application vendors do is they utilize something called the Microsoft Process Detour. And yes, I had to look at my notes. But the Microsoft Process Detour, what is that doing? Well, if a piece of malware, something's going on the machine, the detour process or these whitelisting applications are taking advantage of a detour process to identify what exactly is going on. So yes, PowerShell may be enabled by default on your machine. But what are they executing in PowerShell? Is it for good causes or is it malicious? Well, this detour will allow you to not just inspect what it's doing, but detect potentially malicious activity and stop it dead in its tracks. The other thing that this will do is the whitelisting companies are allowing you to view, log, and document exactly what took place. So should an attack break out or something happen, or maybe there was an attempt that was blocked, you can go review the logs in your SIEM or even the application whitelisting software and see exactly what steps the attacker took and what they tried to execute in your environment. Now, there are many whitelisting application vendors out there. Just recently, I've had the opportunity to speak to a couple of these vendors. Some of them I know pretty well, others not so well. What I can tell you is I am going to get intimate knowledge of all these vendors that I have been exposed to. And what we're going to do is we're going to run them all through a little test. And we're going to see how well they do in our lab environment. We're going to put them up against some of our pen test experts. And then we're going to see what kind of results we get. And that's something that I'm going to share with you guys in a later episode. So definitely be looking for that. But at the end of the day, you really need something to protect your endpoints and stop malicious activity from breaking out in your environment. And quite frankly, again, the best way of doing that is application whitelisting. Okay, now let's talk about those environments that are a little harder to protect. Let's pretend we're in an industrial or manufacturing environment for just a moment here. Typically, I see these environments are made up of a business network. That's day-to-day operations on processing orders, billing, billables, receivables, etc., shipping. And then you have your manufacturing plant where they're making products and goods for consumers or business to business. And typically in that manufacturing environment, some of those machines are 20, 30 years old. They're niche market machines, and they simply can't take new operating systems. They can't take antivirus or malware protections, application whitelisting software. There's nothing you can do to really protect them other than creating some sort of physical air gap. So what do you do in this environment? Well, you create what I would call a virtual air gap, and that's by inserting a firewall right in between your business and your production network. That's right, a firewall. That firewall acts as a physical air gap to protect the production network from the business itself. Because remember, in a business, typically you've got email and internet and all those things that leave you vulnerable to a cyber attack. But in our production environments, we should have none of those things. The only thing that should be running in that production environment behind that physical air gap is the things that are necessary to run your production environment. And if things were to go south real quick, you could simply disconnect the business from the production network and still produce goods while the business recovers from whatever outage or cyber event that occurred. Now, a lot of people say, well, I have VLANs or I have these different switches set up or different IP subnets set up. Folks, that's not secure. That is, you're avoiding broadcast storms with VLANing and that type of network segmentation. The only way to properly secure a business and production environment is by using, at very minimum, a firewall, and a NextGen firewall that is user ID aware, application aware, and has all the tools and systems necessary to not just protect the environment from potential threats, but identify the environment of potential attackers. Now, why I say virtual air gap? Well, because the firewall is sitting there is a virtual air gap. It is physical in sense, but virtual in allowing traffic to pass through. An example, what we like to see in a production environment is an industrial DMZ zone. In the industrial DMZ zone, you would stick machines that need to cross over. So one of the things I've seen is in a production environment, people will have like a web server that just reads information from a production environment. In this case, let's just say it's wanting to read the level of a tank. You know, is a tank 25% full, 50% full, 75, 100, etc. And those results are needed by your person at the front office on the business side because they're responsible for purchasing or replenishing whatever's in that tank. Well, in order to view the contents or the level of that tank, they need a view into the production environment. Well, by all means, we're not going to allow them direct access, right? That's right, we're not. What we're going to do is we're going to have the IDMZ zone, which is going to be for your industrial production network. And then we're going to have a separate zone, which could be a second IDMZ zone, which will be for any of the tools that need to talk to the business side. So again, in this sense, it'd be like a web server that just reads out of the production environment, and then somebody from the business side can view that web portal. So you're creating two layers of crossover for that person to view the data with no direct link in. Now you're probably asking yourself, well, doesn't the machine sitting in the middle have access to both networks? In a sense, yes, but you're building very, very tight controls on what ports and protocols that machine can see going into production, and preferably read-only, and vice versa. When the user reaches in from the business side, you're only allowing outbound traffic or them to read data. You're not allowing them to write anything. That is the safest and most secure way of doing things. Optimally, we wouldn't allow them access, but we all know we need to conduct business. We need to make it easy for the business to continue to move forward while being the most secure. So we try to do that in layers. So if you have a production environment and you're wanting to split this stuff up, again, the preferred method is business needs to be separate from production. There needs to be an industrial demilitarized zone that you can place these devices in that need to cross over, and you need to really restrict what they do. Whatever's living on that production environment should have no email and no internet access. If you need third-party remote access, that's a different discussion that we can get it into later time. Now, I've said a whole bunch in this segment, and probably a little bit more than I really wanted to, but I get carried away. I get really excited about cybersecurity and how businesses can protect themselves. But what I want to share with you is I typically see two sides of the spectrum here. I see a lot of folks that have either been a victim of a cyber event or had a cybersecurity incident that really made them pucker and woke them up to the realities that, yeah, they could be crypto locked, they could become victim. Those guys tend to take cybersecurity a little bit more serious. They're definitely in depth and detailed on some of the actions they take. And then you have the opposite side of the spectrum, the folks who don't believe that they've become a victim of cybersecurity, of a cybersecurity event yet. And I say yet because what I have found in the industry, we just worked an event not long ago where the attackers were in 10 months. So we found the initial, what we believe is the initial implant in the environment. It was 10 months old, and they used that time to sprawl throughout the network and do reconnaissance and plant little seeds for their attack. And they planted these little malwares on all these machines to execute at a certain day and time and crypto lock the machines. So they had been living in that environment 10 months before they executed. Now, you're probably looking at me like, well, why is that important? Shouldn't they have found it? Shouldn't they have detected it? Well, here's what I can tell you. Cyber attackers are doing a direct attack and they're living in your environment and they've done reconnaissance. They're being very careful to try to not be detected. This is where it's very important for you to either have a SIEM log system or better yet, some sort of application whitelisting system that utilizes, and let me look at my notes, the Microsoft Process Detour. I don't know why I can't remember that, but it's been a difficult one. The Microsoft Process Detour. Again, what that does is that inspects. If I'm going to be a cyber attacker and I'm going to be smart, I'm not going to plant malware on your machine, but I'm in your machine, I'm going to live off the land and I'm going to use PowerShell, which is considered a safe app. I'm going to use Command Prompt with this, which is considered a safe app, or something else that's natively living on the machine to launch my attack. Application whitelisting tools have the capabilities to view exactly what type of script they're trying to run, and if it deems it malicious, not only just stop it in its tracks, but report it and give you a snapshot of what the cyber attacker attempted to do. Those are key things here. So at the end of the day, the ultimate thing we're trying to do is protect our environments from cybersecurity events. And of course, this is not done with one magic tool or one magic recipe. As you've heard me talk about today, we've talked about 4 or 5 different layers of security that we could add to protect these environments. And this is just scratching the surface. I've not even begun to peel back the onion of the capabilities of what we could do. But here's what I can tell you. This should cover about 80-85% of the cybersecurity risk in your environment and give you a better stance against cyber attackers. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on Layer 2 of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, and catch up with me next time as we discuss number 3. Have a great day.